everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Lydia and this is Vintage Time to Read. Welcome back, guys. If you are a returning viewer, thanks so much for coming back, and if you're new, hey. Today's video is going to be my February and March reading wrap-up and book review. I read 10 books over the months of February and March, and I wanted to share those with you guys. So I'm going to start with February's books. This year I decided to do something kind of fun, and rather than reading a specific genre per season like I normally do, I thought it would be kind of fun to switch it up a little bit and read books based on the color in which that month reminds me of. So in February, I read only pink books, and in March, I read only green books. And so I determine those books either whether or not the entire book is pink or green, or if just the spine is, or sometimes just the cover. So it has been a really great way for me to read because it allows me each month to get all kinds of different genres, from middle grade to YA to mystery and, true crime. It's been a lot of fun. So we're going to start with the 2 pink books that I read in February. And first up is Lovely War by Julie Barrie. Oh, as you can see, I left myself lots of notes about this book. For me, this was a 5 out of 5 star book. I absolutely loved it. I personally think that the way in which it is written is so new and very creative. So basically the story is about Hazel, James, Aubrey, and Colette. They are 4 individuals who at the beginning of the story do not know each other, and throughout the story, circumstances bring them together. It is told during the time of World War I, and Hazel and James are both from Britain, Colette is from Belgium, and Aubrey is a Black Army soldier from America who is part of the 15th New York Infantry military band. I absolutely love this story. So it's told from the perspective of the Greek god Aphrodite. And as you know, she is the goddess of love. And she is telling the story to her husband Hephaestus. And she pulls in a whole cast of Greek gods to tell their part of the story. So Aphrodite weaves this amazing tale of these 4 individuals from her perspective of love, and then Ares' perspective of war. But then she also pulls in Apollo because 2 of the characters are musicians. And so there's his part that he plays. And then she also pulls in Hades because unfortunately, when you have war, you also have death. And so the story is narrated entirely from the Greek gods, and you kind of get to see how they weave themselves in and out of the love and war and death and hope and tragedy of World War I. So I absolutely loved this. I have never read a war story or a historical fiction story that was told from the perspective of the Greek goddess of love and the Greek god for war. And I was completely blown away with the way Julie did such amazing storytelling in this. You are instantly drawn to the characters. You want to know what happens. This book had me happy, it had me sad, it had me crying, it had me truly feeling as though I could feel the pain, but also the hopefulness that these characters had. I absolutely recommend this book. As I said, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. My second February book was The 2 Lives of Lydia Bird by Josie Silver. And I will 100% admit that the thing that pulled me into this book from the get-go is that the main character's name is Lydia. That's my name. And you do not see very many stories where the main character has that name. And I was like, I wonder what this book is about. I had never read anything by Josie Silver before. I have now since added other books of hers to my list. And this book, I have to say has been one of my favorite books I've read so far this year. I also gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is absolutely amazing. The premise of this story is that on the night of Lydia's birthday, her fiance Freddie is racing to pick up their mutual friend Jonah so that they can all meet at the restaurant for Lydia's birthday dinner. And Jonah and Freddie get into a car accident and Freddie dies. After Freddie's death, Lydia is completely devastated. She just doesn't understand how that could have happened. They were supposed to spend their lives together. They were due to get married shortly. And she's just a shell of who she was before. So her doctor prescribes her some sleeping pills as she has not been sleeping. And one night after taking the sleeping pills, she finds herself in a dream world, and Freddie is still alive and their lives are still on track. They're still due to get married. She still loves him. He still loves her as much as ever. And she seemingly gets to have the life that she wanted. So throughout the story, you have the perspective of her being awake and her being asleep. So Freddie's gone and Freddie's still alive. But you also have some amazing characters. You meet all of the co-workers that Lydia works with at the community center, who are just the sweetest bunch of people. And then you also meet her sister, Elle, who is truly just her absolute best friend. And Lydia just doesn't know how she could have survived without her. But then you also get to meet Jonah, who was also devastated by the loss of his best friend, and very much feels as though it's his fault because Freddie was coming to pick him up. This book, as you can see, I left myself all kinds of little sticky notes, was beautifully written. And it's funny because as I was reading it, it very much reminded me of me and my husband, kind of the way her and Freddie would joke with each other. Like they would say, I love you more than Keira Knightley, or I love you more than Ryan Reynolds. And my husband and I always joke that Ryan Reynolds is such a good looking man. And so that kind of made me laugh. But I could also see it from when they were showing the loss that not only Lydia felt, but also her family, because she and Freddie had grown up together. They had gone to school. They had basically been together since they were in junior high. I could also feel this immense amount of sadness because I have a 16-year-old daughter who is dating a boy that we absolutely adore, and they have been friends since they were in junior high. And I could see how, if they continued to be together, how we as a family would feel that loss as well. And so it was a beautiful book, but it was also at some points hard to read because I think because her name was Lydia and they called her Lids in the book, which is my nickname, I could very much feel like her story was my story. But this book had me crying at points. It had me laughing. It had me smiling. It had me feeling hopeful. I absolutely 100% recommend this book. It was so that completes my February books. So we're gonna move on to March. I read 8 out of 10 of my March TBR books, and I am pretty happy with myself, if I'm being honest. The first book I read in March is The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. I really, really enjoyed this book. I did only give it a 4 out of 5, and I say that because as much as I loved the story, I did kind of feel like there was a lot of information in the beginning that was just being kind of thrown at you, and I truly did kind of struggle to kind of understand exactly what was happening until about halfway through the book. Once I had a grasp on what was really going on and could kind of wrap my head around who all of the characters were and the story as a whole, I did really enjoy it. So the main premise of this book is that the main characters, Hazel and Ben, who are brother and sister, and Ben's best friend Jack, live in a town called Fairfold. And Fairfold is a town of humans, but deep within the forest are all the fairy folk and the Elder King. The two live fairly happily because the humans in the town leave little sacrifices to the fairy people so that they will essentially leave them alone. But the thing that draws people to the town of Fairfold is that within the forest, deep in the forest, there is a horned boy asleep in a glass coffin. So it has a very almost Snow White feel to it in a way. Not only are the tourists that come into Fairfold very intrigued by the horned boy asleep in the coffin, but Hazel and Ben have also always been very intrigued by him. And as kids, they would go into the forest and make up stories about their horned prince. But one day, people all of a sudden realize that the glass on the coffin is broken, which they had always been told was impossible, and the horned boy is missing. Once the horned boy goes missing, a mysterious monster of the forest wakes up and starts wreaking havoc on the people in the town. It is at this point that Hazel and Ben kind of get to jump into action and become the knights in shining armor they've always wanted to be. Throughout the story, we learn that Hazel and Ben and Jack and the horned boy himself have very interesting pasts that kind of all weave together. And I have to say, one of the things I loved most about the story is the relationship between Hazel and Ben. Their brother-sister bond is very sweet at times, but also has that twinge of jealousy at times, which is very common of siblings. They're very protective of each other, always kind of sacrificing themselves for the good of the other. Is very sweet. So I really did like this book. Like I said, for me, it was a 4 out of 5 simply because I felt like the beginning was a lot of information that didn't necessarily need to be there, which I know was a lot of part of the, world building. But I just felt like it was too much, I guess. And then it all felt like it kind of wrapped up nicely at the end, almost a little too quickly. But I still really liked it and would definitely recommend it for anyone who likes fairy tale, more Grimm's fairy tale kind of stories, I guess, and fairy worlds as a whole. The next book I read was my first middle grade book of March, and it's Theodosia and the Serpents of Chaos by R.L. Lefevers. Or Lefevers, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it. I loved this book. Our main character, Theodosia, reminded me so much of my middle daughter, Jillian, and Theodosia's character and personality and spunk very much reminded me of her. As my daughter, Jillian, has gotten older, she has also really kind of fallen in love with the idea of being a museum curator someday. And in this book, Theodosia's father actually runs the Museum of Legends and Antiquities in London, and her mother is an archaeologist who primarily digs up things in Egypt. Well, what makes Theodosia so intriguing is that she basically lives in the museum most of the time because her mother is always off on digs and her father is always so wrapped up in his work that they don't really pay that much attention to her. And then her brother is off at boarding school. Theodosia also has a cat that she, walks the halls of the museum with. And my favorite thing I think about this story that just makes it so cute is that Theodosia actually sleeps in a sarcophagus in a closet. And I just think it's so cute. There's also, of course, a cast of characters that you meet along the way, all the people that work at the museum with her father. There is a secret society that she meets, as well as a kind of street rat, if you will, who lives on the London streets and gets caught one day trying to steal something from Theodosia. What makes Theodosia so special is that all of the antiquities that her parents bring back from their digs in Egypt, a lot of them are cursed with dark, evil magic. And Theodosia can see that dark, evil magic on those objects, and she's the only one who can. And so a lot of her time is spent trying to take those curses off of those objects. Sometimes they go horribly wrong and sometimes they go okay. But one day her mother returns from Egypt with the heart of Egypt, which is a beautiful amulet and supposedly supposed to be the biggest and most intriguing find her mother has ever found while digging. And then it goes missing. So this book is primarily Theodosia's race to find the object, that is said to be cursed with the evilest magic that could bring down all of London, and she needs to find it and return it to Egypt. So I absolutely recommend this. I loved it. It is the first book in a, I believe, 4-book series. I have purchased the other 4 books as we will be reading them next year with our curriculum for school. And my daughter Jillian is currently reading this one and really, really likes it. So I absolutely recommend this. It would be great to read just by yourself, but it would also be a really great book to read out loud to your kids if you're looking for some fun stories to do that with. Or if you just like middle grade books like me, it's a great book as well. The next book I read is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is a standalone historical fiction adult book, which is kind of mixed with some contemporary elements. Evelyn Hugo is a Hollywood starlet whose career began in the 1950s, and she is most famous for several movies, but also for the fact that she has been married 7 times. She's never really been one to be in the public eye as far as telling her story or letting people into her personal life. And so one day she contacts a magazine and asks for a fairly unknown newbie journalist, Monique, to come to her house for what she is told is going to be an exclusive. I really loved this book. I have to say it did not go the way I expected. There is an element of the story that I was not expecting, but it didn't turn me off to the book. I still really enjoyed it. And I have to say, Evelyn Hugo, the whole time I was reading it, reminded me of a mix between Marilyn Monroe, Bette Davis, and Judy Garland. And her whole story from, when she's going back in time and telling Monique about all of these different movies and relationships, has that very old Hollywood glam feel to it. So in the book, you do get to meet all 7 husbands. I have to say, one of them for me was kind of just a throwaway character. He's always the one that I can never really remember, but I feel as though his character was kind of intended to be that way. 3 of her husbands I absolutely loved for different reasons. Yeah, there was something very special about them. I won't go into detail about those because it does kind of ruin the story. But 3 of them I really enjoyed. 2 of them I did not like at all. I thought they were awful. And then 1, I was just kind of really disappointed in how their relationship ended up. I thought he maybe had potential, and unfortunately he did not. I think one of the things I loved most about Evelyn is that she is a very ambitious, cunning character who really just doesn't believe in regrets. She doesn't regret anything she's done. She doesn't really necessarily feel bad about the things that she did to take care of the people in her life that she loved the most. But she does fully admit that she was definitely not always a good person. And so throughout her interview with Monique, you kind of learn a lot about her as a person, but she also really teaches Monique a lot of things about herself. There is a plot twist at the end that I was not expecting. You kind of get this idea from the very beginning that the reason she asked Monique to come to her house to do the interview was not for the reasons that Monique assumed. And I was pleasantly surprised by the way the story wrapped up. It does have some fun moments. It has some very sad moments. There were several moments that I was actually crying. And as you can see, I've left more sticky notes on this one. So I do recommend this one. I will say, for those of you interested in this book, please be aware that it does have a bisexual relationship in it. So just know that going into it. But I really, really, really enjoyed it. The next book I read was also a 5 out of 5 star book for me, and it is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco, which is the first book in, again, I believe a 4 or 5 book series, all from the perspective of the main character, Aubrey Rose. So this is a historical fiction murder mystery. And the two main characters are Aubrey Rose and Thomas Cresswell, who have a very Sherlock and Watson kind of dialogue in the book. Yeah, Kerri stayed very true to the time period and what was and wasn't acceptable for women. But I love that she made the main character of Aubrey a woman who kind of went outside the norm because she was very interested in forensic science and autopsies and detective work, which was just something that wasn't viewed as acceptable during the time period. I will say that there are some kind of gory details to this because, you know, it is about Jack the Ripper. So of course there are crime scenes and autopsies and descriptions about those things. So if you're someone who's a little queasy, just know that going into this. It wasn't overly gory or disturbing, so it didn't bother me. But I could see how it could bother some people. One thing I really enjoyed is that for the most part, the author stayed very true to the actual Jack the Ripper crimes as far as dates and names and details, but she did change up a few things to fit into her storyline, which she does talk about in the back of the book. So I really liked that. One thing that is different about this story as opposed to the real story of Jack the Ripper is that to this day, we still have no idea who Jack the Ripper actually was. And Kerri does a beautiful job of letting us know who it was at the end of her book. I think the reveal of who the murderer is, the whole setting itself is absolutely beautiful. The details in that particular scene are phenomenal. You truly feel like you are there. You understand why the killer is who it is. And it seems to make sense. I really, really love the way she wove that in there. The only thing I can say, and I think I'm not of the norm when I say this. A lot of reviews that I've seen for this book, people didn't see the murderer coming. They couldn't kind of figure out who it was, and they felt like the little details left throughout the story didn't give you a good enough grasp on who he was, which truthfully makes for a great whodunit because you're constantly trying to second guess your own opinions about who the murderer could be. For me, that was not the case. I had it pegged almost from the very beginning, which didn't at all change how I felt about the book. I still truly enjoyed it, and I was pleasantly surprised at how she wrapped it up. But for me, there were just some things that I caught on to at the very beginning that pretty much had me knowing who the murderer was. But with that said, I still really enjoyed it. In this story, you not only get to meet the two main characters, but you also get to meet Aubrey's brother, her father, and her uncle. And, you know, they all have very interesting storylines as well. So I 100% recommend this. I am really looking forward to reading the other books in the series. There's one about Dracula, one about Houdini. I don't remember who the other ones are. But yes, it was very, very good. The next book on my list was another middle grade book, which is The Doldrums by Nicholas Gannon. And this was Nicholas's debut novel. And not only did he write this, but he also illustrated it. I'm kind of disappointed that I have the paperback because in the hardback version, all of the beautiful illustrations are actually in color. But the black and white illustrations are also absolutely gorgeous and set up this completely whimsical feel for the story. But as you can see, the colored illustrations are beautiful as well. So this book is about Archer Helmsley, who is the grandson of renowned explorers Ralph and Rachel Helmsley. And Archer has always basically idolized his grandparents and all of their amazing adventures, but he's never actually met them. And so the story starts where on Archer's 9th birthday, his grandparents are discovered to be missing after being stranded on an iceberg in Antarctica. So Archer lives in Helmsley House with his parents, and it is full of just the most amazing, whimsical things. A polar bear, an ostrich, all these different taxidermied animals, little trinkets that his grandparents have found all over the world on all of their adventures. And because Archer's parents very much do not want him to be a part of his grandparents' world. They have basically kept him locked up in this house this whole time, never allowing him to go on an adventure because he's just too much like his grandparents. But he kind of goes on an adventure anyways because he makes up all of these stories and he talks to the taxidermied animals and can hear them talking back to him. This book honestly had me laughing out loud. There were so many times when I was cracking up at the humor that Gannon puts in here. It's sometimes very quick-witted, it's sometimes very childlike, which you would expect of a middle grade book. But I just absolutely fell in love with it. In addition to Archer, you also meet his two best friends, Oliver, who is the boy that lives next door. And Oliver and his family, hands down, remind me of Ron Weasley and the Weasleys as a whole. Their house is always kind of a mess, but they always just love each other. There's just chaos going on. And Oliver's parents write for and run the Doldrums Press, which is the newspaper. And I just love Oliver. He's always kind of the more reserved one, never really wanting to go with Archer on these grand adventures because Archer decides he is going to set out to find what happened to his grandparents. And so Oliver agrees simply because he wants to have a friend, but is always very reserved about the idea of actually going. They also, along the way, Madeleine Belmont, who is a Parisian girl who shows up one day and has a wooden leg. And the story of how she got the wooden leg is hysterical. And her character also very much reminds me of a Hermione kind of character. She's very smart, very quick-witted, always the one to do the research and make sure that they are very well prepared. And I just love it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars simply because I felt like it kind of took a long time to get anywhere. And to be honest, it doesn't really ever get anywhere. It's really kind of a setup for the big adventure that's supposed to come in book number 2. Now, with that said, nothing in this book, should be taken away from, given that the adventure hasn't happened yet. There are still moments in this book that are adventurous. There are still moments in this book that are lighthearted and hysterical. There are moments that really just pull you in and have you very intrigued. So I am very excited to read the second book in this to see if Archer does in fact end up having the adventure that he wants, because you are left with little bread droppings, if you will, along the way at the end of this story that sets you up beautifully for the second one. So I would definitely also recommend The Doldrums. The next book I read in March is Bonecryer's Moon by Catherine Purdy. I really, really enjoyed this book. Again, for me, it was a 4 out of 5 stars, simply because it did take me quite a while to get pulled into the story. And there were some things that I just felt were, I don't know, not fully explained, that kind of left me with questions. It is the first book in a series though, so I'm wondering if some of those questions will be answered in book number 2. But this story is told from this perspective of 3 different characters. Aless, who is working towards being a farrier of the dead, like all of the women in her familia. Sabine, who is her best friend and is also working towards being a farrier, but hates every minute of it, because in order for them to be a farrier, they actually have to kill animals and collect the bones of those animals, because those bones give them graces. So like Sabine has a fire salamander that gives her the ability to heal quickly. Her best friend Aless has a falcon that allows her to see. And then it's also told from the perspective of Bastian, who is a boy who saw his father be killed by a bone crier when he was a young boy. Because once they have collected the 3 bones of their animal, then they have to complete their rite of passage before becoming a farrier by killing their true love, or their amourie. And when Bastian was little, he actually saw his father be killed. He has ever since been out for revenge. We also meet Bastian's best friends, Jules and her brother Marcel. And the whole perspective basically of this is that they do this to ferry the dead either to Alara in paradise, or to Tyrus, the god of the underworld. And so they have to obtain these skills so that they can successfully ferry the dead one night a month on the new moon. The story is kind of set in motion when Aless goes to complete her rite of passage and summon her Amore and kill him. I think the character building in this story is really good. I really enjoyed the perspectives of Aless and Sabine and Bastian, and then the other women in the story, as well as Jules and Marcel. I think their characters are very well thought out. I will tell you that the villain in this story was beautifully written. Sometimes there's not like, the character isn't overly evil. They're not, in your face bad, but the things they do and the calculations they make and the things they say just give you that feeling of evilness. The villain in this story, to me, very much felt that way. So I really enjoyed this. I am very much looking forward to reading the second book in the series to see how it ends. I also re-listened to Peter Pan this month by J.M. Barrie. And Peter Pan is always a 5 out of 5 star book for me. I absolutely love Peter and all of the characters in Neverland, the Lost Boys, Wendy Darling and her brothers, Nana the dog, and of course, mischievous Tinkerbell. So the kids and I listened to it because it was the book choice for a book club I'm part of, Once Upon a Time Book Club, which is where you read stories that either inspired Disney movies or retellings of Disney classics and Disney movies. And so I listened to that with my kids and they really enjoyed it. So I definitely recommend that you guys get Peter Pan and listen to it or read it. And I am so sorry, the neighbor is working out in his yard and I would stop, but I just have to keep going. So I will try to get rid of as much of the background noise as I can, but I only have one more book, so let's just dive in. The last book I listened to in March was Splintered by A.J. Howard, which is the first book in a 4 book series, which is kind of a reimagining of Alice in Wonderland. I loved this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Not because of anything really wrong with the story. There are just things about it for me that made it only a 4 out of 5. Part of that could be truly that I listened to it, and like any Alice story, there is so much going on, and there is so much whimsicalness and nonsensicalness to the characters and the storyline that I was sometimes a little bit lost. So I think if and when I read the hard copy of it, I might change my review from a 4 to a 5. This story is told from the perspective of Alyssa, who is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Alice Liddell, who is the little girl that inspired Lewis Carroll to write Alice in Wonderland and Alice with the Looking Glass. So this story basically from the get-go tells you that everything you've ever thought about the Alice in Wonderland story is wrong. And this story is much more aligned with Alice Through the Looking Glass than Alice in Wonderland. It does introduce a bunch of new characters into the story. Of course, the main character, Alyssa, and her best friend and kind of overprotective big brother type figure of Jeb. But then it also introduces a new character, Morpheus. I absolutely loved those 3 main characters. So Alyssa, to me, reminds me, she has that innocent side of Alice that you expect from the Alice in Wonderland stories, kind of mixed into the grown-up version, teenage version of Alice. She's innocent, yet tough and quirky. And then you have Jeb, who is kind of this boy next door, hard-edged, tormented artist type. And then Morpheus. And with Morpheus, you really just never know exactly what to expect. You never know what he is, who he is, if he's good, if he's bad, what his motives really are. And he, honestly, as a character, kind of keeps you second guessing the whole time. So as I said, the perspective of the story is told from Alyssa. All of the women in Alice's family have been cursed from the moment she fell down the rabbit hole and found Wonderland. They hear the voices of bugs talking to them, they hear flowers talking to them, and along the way have been told that they were crazy. And Alyssa's mother, Allison, actually ends up in an insane asylum where she's put into a straitjacket because, you know, she hears voices and she won't eat out of anything other than a teacup. And so she's been in this insane asylum ever since. And Alyssa, since that point, has very much kind of distanced herself from her mom because she's terrified that she's going to become her mother. So one day she realizes that things are awry in Wonderland, and if she wants to break this curse on her family, she's gonna have to go there and figure things out. So she jumps through the mirror in her bedroom and is set off on an adventure to do just that. The plot went in a direction that I did not expect. It is a completely new twist to the story. And like I said, this book basically makes you feel like everything you've ever known about the Alice in Wonderland story is not correct, and you have gotten it wrong this whole time. And this story is going to clear up some of that stuff for you. It is much darker, much edgier, has this very Tim Burton feel to it in the way that it's described. A.J. Howard does a phenomenal job with the imagery in this story, and, you know, just making it so magical and whimsical. But like I said, it's a darker, magical and whimsical, very much like the brainchild of some Tim Burton story. I absolutely enjoyed it. In June, I will be reading book number 2 from the series, which is Unhinged. And so I am very much looking forward to that as well. So, but that is the end of my reading wrap up for February and March. Thank you so much for hanging out. I know it was kind of a long video. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button and the bell so that you can be notified anytime I have new content. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you have read any of these books, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts on them. Do you agree with my reviews? Do you disagree? And if you haven't read any of these books and are interested in them, also let me know that below. I'd love to know if one of them piqued your interest and if you think you'll be reading it. So I am currently jumping headfirst into my April TBR. I have 16 books on my April TBR, so I'm gonna have to read super fast if I want to get through more books in April than I did in March. I figure if I get 8, that's at least half, and I will be happy with that. So stay tuned next month when I will give you my April wrap up. So until the next video, guys, like I said, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you soon. Bye.